Joanie, we just got
Yeah.
done chatting with Ross Blankenship. It's all around assessing CEOs and senior leaders, and I can't believe what a nice guy he is. But listening to him and his process and what the book is about, it struck me as just such a great guy, such a great topic. What were your thoughts?
Well, in addition to learning about CEOs and assessment, I mean, learning about how to write and what his process was just riveting.
Yeah.
And he's very personable and sharing of his inner workings. And boy, this is an episode that I want to rewatch.
Yeah. I'm going to watch this one a couple of times. We can't wait for you to see it. Ross Blankenship, Assessing CEOs and Senior Leaders, right now.
We're here with Ross Blankenship, and I'm really excited about it. I know Nick is too, because actually Ross has one of the very recent books out, and it's about assessing CEOs and senior leaders, which is a really hot topic. And let's see, we have lots of questions for Ross. Thank you so much for being here, Ross.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I guess our first question is typically, what actually inspired you to write this book? I mean, why now? Why this book? How did you even have this idea? Or was it your idea?
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a good question. I could answer that question in a lot of different ways, I think. The short version is I was an English major and always wanted to write a book. So that idea had been in my head. Now, I did not think I would write a book like this. I think I thought I would be a poet or a novelist or something. But when Rodney took over or started the series for Fundamentals of Consulting Psychology, I saw an email for a call for proposals, and I emailed him and just told him I'm interested in this and would love to at least work on a book if somebody needs a ghostwriter or something like that. And he said, why don't you just propose a book? What would you want to write about? And I sent him a list of 3 topics. And I can't remember where in the list this was. It wasn't the first topic that I pitched him. But I was doing this kind of work at the time. And so it was very top of mind. I said, how about assessing senior leaders? And he said that topic tends to generate some interest and is something that people are curious about. And there's not a ton out there. And when I went to write the proposal, I was looking at books, trying to find competition and really couldn't find something that sat in the exact space that I was interested in, which is sort of like helping people learn about it. So yeah, that was mostly why.
Well, I just want to follow up, and then I'm going to hand it over to Nick for a second here. But you said you were doing this kind of work. So what is your background, and how did you get into assessing CEOs and senior leaders?
So I went to graduate school for consulting psychology. So I studied this field in particular. My interest had been in individual assessment and in coaching. And so went to the program at the California School of Professional Psychology and studied under Rodney Lohman, basically with the goal of working with senior leaders, both as a coach and as an assessor and advisor. And while I was there, I got recruited to a boutique executive search firm to start their leadership advisory group. So really, like, the first applied work that I had was working with executives in the context of search. So I was working with more experienced interviewers, but not assessors, and kind of learned as I went in that context. From there, I went to Spencer Stewart, an international search firm, and worked in their leadership advisory services group, doing executive assessments for succession and selection, and some coaching and development. And now I'm out on my own, kind of doing the same thing under my own firm name. But so had probably a little bit of a quicker jump into the field because of that kind of early recruiting experience, and then was able to layer on more broad-based, I think, training from a global firm after that.
That's great, Ross. It's always so interesting for us, and I think for the people that are watching, to understand how people come about writing a book. And being an English major, although certainly helped, it sounds like you had the interest anyway, and sound like you were surrounded with some support. As we're talking about the book, I would imagine that most of our watchers have read the book, or at least know of the book. Obviously, we'll put links to buy the book, but let's just say someone hasn't read it yet.
Yeah.
What's without giving away everything, Ross, what's maybe one or two things that you hope people take away from the book if they wanted to get into senior exec level or senior leader coaching or in assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Takeaways, gosh. I think the main thing that I was aiming for was to give a sense. It's not a very long book, and there's a whole lot that can be said about senior leaders and about executive assessment. I wanted to give a sense, it's the subtitle is a primer for consultants, but how do you give a lay of the land of such a complex practice area in a way that's applicable and kind of easy to apply? And so a couple of things is, one, that it is a pretty complex form of assessment and of practice, but it's one that's really doable. And it's one that's really interesting. And a lot, I think, of the complexity comes from the fact that senior executive jobs are shaped by the executive themselves in a way that lower level jobs aren't always. They have a lot more degrees of freedom at the top to determine what they should focus on. And that was the thing that really interested me in it anyway, is that you can kind of create this equation for how an assessment's going to work. And then there's a big X that's like, except that they might change the job when they get into it. And how do you evaluate that? And how do you advise a company or a consumer of executive assessment on that reality? And that's what I really liked, because it gets into a little bit of evaluating a person and what they're motivated by, and being able to tell a story for how you think they'll do a job, how you think they'll think about a job, rather than just saying good or bad fit. I really don't like assessments that kind of come down to a grade that say, this person's going to do well or not do well. I like more of, if you're looking for this kind of thing, then this person will probably do it in these kinds of ways.
Oh, I agree, especially at that level. I mean, that's when you said it's really complicated. Absolutely, getting it so that you're looking at various aspects of it and what kind of
Mm-hmm.
environment they're going to be working in, et cetera. So I love the way the book really dives into that.
Yeah, that was, you talk about environment too. Another key thing that I when Rodney had said, what's your angle? A lot of what I wanted to focus on was the context of the assessment. And there's a whole chapter in the book on context that goes from, what's the assessment for, all the way out to what's the economy doing. And that's another thing that I think is interesting about senior level assessments, is that you can evaluate culture. There are some assessments I did at Spencer Stewart where cultural fit to the state and like the actual, like the societal culture was really important to the fit to the job, because they had to be able to speak to indigenous people in a way that, a non-indigenous person would really probably not be able to, not even struggle. I just don't know that you can make that connection. And that's just an interesting way of thinking about work, I think, that's attractive to me. And then another thing too is all of the ethical conundrum, that come up, ethical issues, both because I think they're interesting and because I worked with people from all different types of backgrounds over the course of my assessment work in those other firms. And, people in psychology, I think, get explicit training to think about ethics, where people in other professions don't. And so that was something that I was really interested in drawing that out explicitly as its own chapter, to say, there are weird things that happen here that if you're not aware of might just happen without your knowledge or without even thinking about it. And so wanted a place for people to at least learn about that a little bit.
Oh, well said.
Yeah, and we just had Rodney Lohman in, and talking about the overall nature of the series. But for a future episode, we're actually going to be discussing the actual book on ethics. And I do love how you did tie in that. And I think the way you described the process Ross, is just so great in the book, in that it really is about connecting with a client, understanding their needs, and then understanding the individual and fit. And so it's a little bit of, yes, art and science. And this book definitely is a great primer, as the subtitle, to help people learn that. This book is so new, Ross. I'm wondering if you were to rewrite it today, what would you add anything? Would you take anything away from it, or what's changed in your mind?
That's a good question. In terms of what's changed, I'm sure there's more research that I could find, or things that I missed. I looked at the contents before we got on. I'm kind of glancing at it off screen here, but chapter 5, technological developments and assessment. I feel like even since the book came out, that landscape has totally changed with Chat GPT, and all of the AI, natural language generation and natural language processing. I kind of touch on natural language processing, but my sense is that that area is going to continue to progress in really odd and unpredictable ways. I mean, think about one of the assessment methods that I've worked on since the book came out, that the book kind of led to, is working with a company that does natural language processing and thinking about how to apply that in executive assessments. And I think in a world where somebody could answer those questions using an AI, it stands to reason that the ability to monitor who's actually answering questions is going to get even harder. And so I think that is an area that is really interesting to me. It's kind of the overlap between, talk about the art and the science, like the overlap between what I can do as a professional and where technology is going in this world, also in this practice area. And so that's something I would dig even farther into, and probably broaden out a little bit more.
Yeah, interesting, Russ, because you'd have to keep doing it over and over again as the technology changes too. But I like your sort of broad stroke, though, of what are the ethics, behind this, because that can help apply to it as the technology changes.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you a question about writing. I've been sitting here eager to ask you this question ever since you mentioned you were an English major, because I was an engineering major, and I tell you, it's sort of a bittersweet relationship that I have with writing. It's very painful, but once it's done, it's great. But I was wondering about for you. I mean, how was it to write the book? Have you written a book before? This was your first book, like an entire book? Or okay, so what's that like? I mean, if we have any aspiring, or interested people who might want to write in the series, tell us about the process.
Agonizing. The quote that's always resonated with me is that a writer is someone for whom writing is hard. I would say it's never been an easy thing for me, but it's always kind of captured my imagination for one reason or another. And I think I like language. The thing that I studied in undergrad as an English major was Shakespeare. And if I could have been a Shakespeare major, I would have. But I love language as a tool, and the way that writing can kind of open your eyes to new ways of thinking. There's a professor at Virginia. Oh gosh, what's his name? It's on my bookshelf somewhere. Mark Edmondson. He has a book called Why Write? And he basically, I can't remember who the quote's from, but the quote is, writing increases the amount of available reality, by getting your thoughts out into the world so that somebody else can interact with that. There's like more to be thought and more to be said. And I love that idea, but that makes writing agonizing. The thing that I loved about it, and that I miss, I would say my memory of it is probably fonder now that it's not happening, is, the year I wrote this book, it was 2020. So it was during the pandemic, and we had one child and then had our second child that year as well. And so the only time that I consistently had to write was from 5 to 7 a.m. and then kind of intermittently throughout the workday. But that discipline was really useful. Just sitting down, the thing that really helped ultimately was realizing that I would always feel like I hadn't done enough research to start writing, or that there was something else I needed to do to prepare, but that what I actually had to do was just sit down and get out the version out of my head onto paper that was already there. and then start working on it. The kind of, I think the old saying, like, you can't start thinking about how to paint a room until you've built it. And that really was applicable for me. Of like, I need to, the ethics chapter was the last chapter for a really long time. And that's like the kind of thing that you can't edit until you have something written about ethics and then say like, wait, maybe this should come earlier in the logic of the book. Mm-hmm. So that's a rambling answer.
Well, it's great. And I think, I think it speaks to, as maybe people, maybe the last large bit of writing, maybe some of our viewers have done is maybe a journal article or maybe their dissertation, right? If they're in industry. Yeah. And so I think that, as you look at that process, there's shades of that. But you've outlined it beautifully, Ross, that the routine of writing the book is important. But it's never going to be easy. It's always going to be something that you're going to have to work for, and it's always something, but rewarding. Which I guess would be a next question for us is: have there been what was the most rewarding part of the process for you, particularly now that we're a couple years post-publish?
Gosh, I genuinely, the thing that comes to mind is just holding the thing in my hand.
Yeah, it's done! Yay!
That was really rewarding. Yeah. I mean, it was also, that was really rewarding. I think it's interesting though, having now written a book. I was all excited about being a PhD student. I remember a mentor of mine saying, a PhD won't get you as far as you think it will, but it will open a door for you. You still have to do the work. He was like, this will get you on the bus, but you still have to kind of decide where to ride to, and you have to get off the bus there. It was a whole metaphor that he had. I feel like a book is a little bit similar. Like, it's a ton of work, and it feels like it's going to transform things. And then it comes out and it's like, okay, now I have this thing that I've got to do something with, and I'm not really sure what to do with it. And so it was incredibly rewarding to just hold it and say, like, I've accomplished this thing that existed in my mind for so long. And man, did it not materialize in the way that I'd imagined once, but that was incredibly rewarding. And then I think being able to point to it professionally has created really odd and kind of interesting opportunities to consult with technology companies that are developing assessment methods, or to talk to consulting or executive search firms that want to get into executive assessment or interested in working with executive populations in different ways. So it has kind of opened up an area of practice that's almost like a level of abstraction higher. Yeah, I've been thinking a little bit too about one of the questions you asked, Joanie, like, why write this book? I think my interest in executive assessment, as much as I enjoy the actual work of interviewing and kind of writing reports about executives, I like thinking about assessment also. So like almost like a level of abstraction higher. And one of the things I did at Spencer Stewart was I was on the internal faculty to train new consultants in how to do our assessment method. And this is the book that I would have given people to say, like, go read this so that you have a lay of the land. And then we can talk about all the fun little nuanced parts of it. But I think that it's created opportunities to go into like other areas that aren't really practice, but it's sort of like talking and thinking about assessment and new ways of doing it. And that's been really fun. I've really enjoyed that too.
Well, it sounds like it's your passion. I mean, people love, talking about their passion, even if it's not for money, right? You're just having a conversation. Somebody calls you up and you're like, sure, I'll talk to you.
Yeah. I'm trying to get better about doing it for money.
Well, I didn't mean like for consulting. I just meant like a friend says, hey, let's talk about, over a glass of wine or something, as opposed to, I don't know, sports or something. I get really geeky.
I think too, another thing is it has, in ways that I wouldn't have expected, created opportunities to write more. I think it's given me more confidence in writing and in kind of sitting down and putting something out there. So you talked about, have I written before? Am I writing still? I have never. This is the first book I've written. I would love to write another book. I'm still learning about
on what?
I'd like to write for a broader audience. Yeah.
What would you write about?
I decided to start writing a Substack instead of another book, just to kind of test ideas and practice writing for a broader audience. I've really enjoyed that. mostly because it's it doesn't take as much work, and you get a little bit more feedback as you go. But I'm kind of using that as a way to test ideas and figure out what am I enjoying writing about. A lot of what I think enjoyed about the actual doing of executive assessment is hearing about people's careers, and kind of career decision making. And one of the things I'm doing this semester is teaching a course at Virginia online on navigating complex decisions in work and career. And so I've been thinking a lot about making career decisions and how people do that and what makes for good ones, and how do you make a really big change after you've already committed to a certain direction for a certain period of time. So I don't know that I have the book idea hammered out yet, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Is a play on the list too?
Yeah, maybe
Mr.
one act play.
Shakespeare.
A monologue.
He's like, not a play, but maybe scripts for
Maybe a
conducting
screenplay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody's got a screenplay, right?
Right. Based a little close to home sometimes too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So do you ever co-author or collaborate with people on things, or are you liking it better just to write on your own? How does that work for you?
That's a good question. I have co-authored. Let me think about this. I've written a paper that came out in Leadership Quarterly a couple of years ago, maybe like 5 now. And then I co-authored a chapter when I was in grad school, which I enjoyed. I talked with a friend about potentially pitching a book together in this series, and the timing just didn't quite work out. But it's a good question. I think with the right co-author, it works really well, and especially if the roles are kind of clear. Whether that's, in the first case I did it was I will do all the research and I'll kind of write out the research and you fill in with your experience, because I wasn't very experienced at the time. The second one was much more collaborative as peers, and so I don't know that I've had an opportunity to do that in any extended way yet. I tend to work in kind of an odd way. Like I work kind of little bits, and then I'll have a really productive, all-nighter. And I don't know how well that works with a partner.
I was gonna say 5 a.m. is already a non-starter for me.
Well, I'm not doing that anymore. My alarm went off today at 5:45, and I ignored it entirely. So I'll tell you what I'm interested in, to the extent that it is interesting to you, is working with an editor. I love the idea of like putting something out there and then having somebody say, here's what I see here. And here, if you kind of restructure it, because my mind kind of works like that. I think the agonizing part of writing is usually the first draft is getting a thing out there to then start working with. But I love editing, and kind of thinking about structure and why something should come before or after, and what changes that might make in the mind of the reader. And so I like the idea, and that was something I really enjoyed. I mean, writing for the series, you get feedback from Rodney, from the series editor. Then you get feedback from a development editor, APA, and then a copy editor, and peer review. There were 3 people who read the book and gave like a full edit. It was incredible. It was so useful. It was overwhelming. It's like I got the email from Rodney. It's like, okay, I'm gonna like practice my mindfulness. I'm gonna take a deep breath and not panic, and then I'm gonna look at like the 45 pages of notes that I got on that book.
Right.
But it was super helpful because there were things that I'd totally missed, and like it's just it's not because I wasn't trying to be diligent about it. I just missed it. So I like that. I do think writing is very much a collaborative effort, even if you are, a solo author. There were teams of people that were working on this thing with me and giving me guidance. So grateful to all of them as well.
I think it's important for everybody to hear that again, Ross, that writing is a group activity sometimes. And I know yours is the only name on the book, but you had a bunch of people who were helping with that. And I think that one of those personality traits of someone to be a good writer is to be able to create conditions where they can receive that feedback and then integrate it in a way. And it sounds like you just did an amazing job as evidenced with the book. But understanding that there's a difference between asking and receiving critique to make something better and then taking that to heart of your quality or competence as a writer. Because as you said at the beginning, you're an English major, so you clearly know how to write. So again, just understanding that being part of the process, maybe that dissuades some people if they don't understand that from writing.
Yeah. And I think it's hard. It's hard to even receive feedback in the mindset of this is helpful. This is going to make my manuscript better. It's still emotionally taxing, I think. And it's sort of like it's sort of like being yelled at, and like, how do you sit there and kind of process, like, okay, what's useful here? I don't need to receive all of this. I don't need to incorporate all of this. Like, the tone might be irksome to me, but they might not be wrong. I think it requires kind of a constant conversation with yourself, I think, to interact with that productively. And like, I would also just reiterate, like, by the time you're doing that, in my estimation, you've already done so much of the excruciating work. It's like, yeah, well, you can yell at me, but I produced a thing that you're like in conversation with me about. Like, I acted and now you're reacting to it. And I love that, but it is hard to act, especially if somebody doesn't invite you to. I had the grand benefit of Rodney saying, why don't you propose something? Even that little cracked window was huge for me.
Nice. Yeah, I found that certainly a lot of constructive feedback with him as an editor, for sure. Not the yelling so much. I don't know if your experience was different, but
No, he's not.
that was just a
yeller.
metaphor, whatever, an analogy. Yeah. But
I
I
still
have,
remember a note
yeah.
that he gave me on my dissertation. I won't say it,
You've
but
been on a long haul.
I can see it still. Yeah, that was the best.
I have one question I'd love to get in before we wrap up, and that is, we've talked a lot about the consultants and people who are doing assessment. What about the senior leaders and CEOs? Have any of them seen your book? Have you gotten reactions for them? Or yeah,
that's a great question. I don't know that I have off the top of my head. I have the CEO of a search firm. I've talked to him about it a little bit, about thinking through leadership and how to train people to think about leadership. That was another angle that I've thought about pursuing, is maybe writing more of like a leadership type book. I feel like there's a lot of those out there. So, but I don't know that I have talked to many like people who would be on the other side of the table about the book. Certainly when I do assessments, they know about it because they're pretty good about figuring out who they're going to be talking to. And I'll talk to them about, the process of writing it. Not all of them have read it. Very diligent ones have read it, but that kind of tells you something about them too,
Interesting. Yeah. All right, Nick, why don't you take us to the end here?
Sure. Ross, there's so much good information shared. Obviously, we'll share a link to the book. We're happy to share a link to your Substack as well, if you'd like to share that. But where can people go to learn a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing today?
Easiest place to find me is probably on LinkedIn. I have a website, which is rossblankenship.io, and that kind of has a very high level amount of information about where to find me. But those two places, and would love to hear from anybody. Reach out, shoot me a message on LinkedIn, or contact me on my website, anything like that.
Ross, it's been an amazing conversation with you this evening. On behalf of SCP and my co-host, Joanie Connell, thank you for attending and for participating in the SCP podcast. Until next time, we'll see you right here.